Hi, this is Uri L'Tzedek's Talking Torah and Tzedek. I'm Judry Subar. I'm here with Dr. Laura Shaw Frank. Dr. Frank, or if I may, Laura.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Is the holder of a PhD in Jewish history. She's taught in a number of different contexts, and she is currently the director of contemporary Jewish life at AJC. Laura, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good. So I'd like to get started by asking you about the Jewish communal work that you're involved in. And I'm wondering if you can tell us how you came to be doing this kind of work. And particularly, I'm curious about how your academic work as a Jewish historian led you to it, and how any aspect of your personal background led you to do this work.
Sure. Okay, so I've been recently reflecting on this question because it's either today or tomorrow, I don't even know what day it is the anniversary of the Zionism as Racism resolution in the UN in 1975. And I was in second grade in 1975, and my parents took me out of school for the day. I was not in Jewish day school yet. They moved me to Jewish day school in fourth grade. I was in public school, and they took me out of school for the day to go to the city to protest against the resolution. And that day had a really large impact on me. I went to the city with my father, and I sat on his shoulders. I made a sign, and I sat on his shoulders, and there were 100,000 people there. I've looked that number up since. And I just felt this heart swelling kind of, I am a part of something bigger, in the way that, a second grader can understand something like that. It had a very big impact on me. However, I think that when I went into a career, I wasn't thinking about going into sort of an activist Jewish type of career. I was a corporate lawyer for 10 years, and I became a teacher in Baltimore when we lived in Baltimore, largely out of just falling in love with teaching, having so many people ask me to teach and falling in love with teaching. And it was in that moment of teaching that I became kind of a professional activist. I know that sounds kind of funny because you don't necessarily think about teachers as being professional activists,
Yeah.
but I looked very much at my role as a Jewish studies teacher and as a Jewish history teacher as being as being a role that allowed me to be a crusader for the Jewish people, and also allowed me to be an address for my students who are grappling with all sorts of issues with respect to their Jewish identity. And some of those were social justice issues, certainly, to unpack those in a safe way, in a safe space where they weren't going to get criticized for not believing the right way or not being the right kind of Jew. It was a very diverse student body. So the truth is, my PhD was a result of my desire to be an activist and not the other way, which is kind of funny because you don't usually hear that from people. People usually get their PhD first, but I started my PhD when I was my PhD program when I was 40, and had already been teaching for a number of years. I think that I'm someone who is a very deep diver inner, if you will. So when I was trying to advance an agenda of an inclusive Judaism, of a Judaism with a commitment to certain social justice issues, and drawing upon history, which I know we'll get to talk to soon, as a source of inspiration for those agendas, I wanted to have a PhD so that I really could advance. I really was like moving ahead as a credentialed teacher, as a credentialed Jewish communal activist.
What is you mentioned the idea of an inclusive Judaism? What is it about Judaism that you think requires inclusivity, or is that the way you look at it in any event?
I hope that Judaism can be, and I don't think we're always there at all, but I hope and want Judaism to be a place where anyone who's part of this big messy Jewish people will feel at home and find a place. And I know that that's not always the case. And I also know that that sounds maybe a little bizarre coming from an Orthodox Jew. But that's really my agenda. My agenda is that Jews should feel comfortable in the Jewish community, no matter who they are, whether they're female or LGBTQ or have different abilities or disabled, converts, Jews of color, people who are often marginalized in the Jewish community. I think that it's my very, very strong agenda is that those people will feel that there is a place and a home for them in the Jewish community.
So you just suggested that that perspective is unusual in the Orthodox community. And I think as a matter of numbers, you're probably right. But do you think that that perspective is something that should be tolerated in the Orthodox community, even though it's a little maybe offbeat, if I can use that term? Or do you think that it should be championed as the most appropriate perspective on what the Orthodox Jewish world should be like?
It's so complicated. These questions are incredibly, incredibly complicated, and there's no one good answer to them. Do I want the Orthodox community to be racist or biased or sexist? No, I definitely do not want any of those things. At the same time, one could say that I could see somebody having a reasonable perspective saying the Orthodox community is inherently sexist and I want nothing to do with it. I am a staunch feminist and I didn't grow up Orthodox. I chose to be in the Orthodox community despite and because of my passionate feminism and my passionate Judaism. So I think it's a complicated question to kind of assess like what that means about the Orthodox community, what those issues mean about the Orthodox community. I do think that the Orthodox community in general, and I don't want to like sort of generalize about every sub-community, because the Orthodox community is very complex and multivalenced. But in general, the Orthodox community has engaged in quite a bit of gatekeeping in the past, and will continue to do so, I believe. And by gatekeeping, I mean, these people are allowed to inside the gate, and these people are not allowed inside the gate. And depending where you are in the Orthodox community, right, like your gate isn't in a different place. And on one hand, I have a real problem with gatekeeping. Like I think that we should kind of throw the gates open and let people in. And on the other hand, I understand that Jewish law in certain cases kind of militates for gatekeeping. And as a movement that is adhering to Jewish law, it's difficult to just erase those gates. So it's a complicated question.
Yeah, complicated indeed. Let's step outside the Orthodox world for a second and talk about where you work. You work at AJC, and I was looking at the AJC website and I saw that it describes itself as, among other things, an organization that works to safeguard the rights of all people. Presumably that means all people, not just Jews. Why should a Jewish organization have that as part of its mission?
So I'm going to give you two answers to that. One is a kind of more transactional answer, and one is a more aspirational answer. Okay. The transactional answer is that when societies respect the rights of all people, Jews are safer. And I think that that's really important. I mean, if there's anything I've learned as a Jewish historian, it's that societies that respect minorities, that respect immigrants, that respect those who might be disenfranchised in some way in other communities, those societies that are safer for Jews, because Jews are a traditional minority disenfranchised group, not in Israel, but everywhere else. So that's my transactional answer. My more aspirational answer is that I'm not going to say that all Jewish values point toward human rights values, because it's not true. There's no question that there are complicated sources in the Jewish community, not in the Jewish community, in Jewish source material, in Torah, in Talmud, that might not fit an agenda as we see it in the 21st century with respect to social justice. However, I do think that overarching Jewish values militate toward inclusion, militate toward social justice. Tzedek u'mishpat, in a very, very profound way. I think that while there are certainly sources that might point us in other directions, the umbrella of philosophy that is transmitted through Jewish sources is a philosophical bent of protecting of minority groups, of protecting of those who are weak, of protecting those who are in need of an extra helping hand, financially, physically, in so many different ways. So I do think that, and AJC also feels
we lost your last couple of words there. You were saying AJC feels, and then
yeah, that I think that AJC itself as an organization feels. I'm going to check my, yeah, okay. I'm on the good internet in my house.
Okay.
That AJC itself feels that working for a more socially just society is actually a Jewish act.
Okay. What some might call, and I hope this doesn't trivialize the very important point that you're making, the widows and orphans thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
The widows, orphans, and stranger.
Right.
And stranger in your marriage.
Okay. Yeah. So with regard to your work at AJC, I know that a lot of your work has to do with Israel engagement, and I'm sure that in that context, you think a lot about the various constituent parts of the contemporary Jewish world, the American part vis-a-vis the Israel part, but also probably the various subparts of the American Jewish community. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how those various subcommunities might work together, in particular with regard to some of the social justice issues that you were just referring to.
I think that's a hard question. I really do. Like, if we're going to be very honest, I think that that's tough. I think that I tend to be a Pollyanna-ish kind of person sometimes, and that's a flaw of mine. It's also, I think, a wonderful aspect of my personality.
I think that's a really good thing.
That Pollyanna-ish person, but I don't really have so much Pollyanna-ish illusions about the Jewish community at this moment being able to work together on sort of the traditional social justice issues that we think about, simply because, sadly, political divides have taken on religious valences in the Jewish community, both in America and also in terms of America and Israeli Jewry. And some social justice issues have also taken on political valences. So I'm thinking, for example, about climate change, about immigrants. I think that it can be complicated to unify a Jewish community that is very politically divided right now. And it's actually really not that politically divided, meaning like the vast majority of the Jewish community in America feels a certain way. And the Orthodox community is sort of split depending on whether they're modern Orthodox or ultra Orthodox. And the Israeli Jewish community is a little more complicated, but we can't really kind of have them, put them in boxes according to American politics because they're not American. But so, but we are divided. We are divided people. And I think that finding those commonalities with respect to social justice between the liberal arm of the Jewish community and the Orthodox arm of the Jewish community is going to be a challenging one. I think that's why Uri L'Tzedek is so important. Actually, it's an incredibly important voice, because I think that the liberal arm of the Jewish community tends to perhaps associate their Judaism too much with simply Tikkun Olam, and not perhaps with Jewish education or Jewish literacy or Jewish ritual engagement, and the Orthodox community, the opposite. And that's an oversimplification, obviously, right? It's very much an oversimplification, but it's,
Yeah, these are all very, very complex issues, of course, as you've said. You just used the phrase Tikkun Olam, and I'd like to ask you about that a little bit. For some people, that phrase, meaning making the world a better place, it seems like a self-evident value. For others, it's a new addition at best among important Jewish values. How do you use that term, and what does it mean for you as a Jewish historian, as just a person?
Right. I think I look at the term as Jews, myself, members of the Jewish community, having a responsibility, and truly a responsibility that we must carry with us to work toward a better world, that we are here for a reason, and that we have to sort of listen to the voices of our tradition and of our God, pushing us to not just sort of spout that phrase in a kind of, throwaway way, but to really think carefully about, is my life advancing Tikkun Olam? Am I doing the work, whether it's my professional role all the time, or whether it's something I do on the side, or whatever it is, am I going to live my life in a way that is actually actively pursuing a more just world? I like, my kids laugh at me all the time because I love the musical Hamilton, but one of my favorite songs as a historian in the musical Hamilton is "History Has Its Eyes on You." And I often think about these people in the Jewish community who are working so passionately for social justice. And I think about the history books that will one day be written about these social justice issues, whether about within the Jewish community or outside it, and how these people's actions and passions and work, rolling up their sleeves and working, will be memorialized for the future. And I think that we all kind of need to remember that history has its eyes on each one of us.
Okay. So you've mentioned some of the issues that you are intellectually engaged with, and I'm intuiting emotionally engaged with, and engaged with in terms of actually doing things. You mentioned feminism, inclusion of all sorts of other marginalized groups in the Jewish community and more broadly. In terms of your actions as an individual, with regards to being engaged with issues that help people like that is that help marginalized people. As someone with a background as a historian and as a Jewish professional, you've talked about this a little bit, but what is it that draws you to that sort of activism?
You mean activism like gender activism?
Yeah, as one example, sure. But why don't we take that?
Sure. Okay. So I think there's the inside the Jewish community gender activism, which is actually really mostly where I've been involved with it, although not exclusively. And there's kind of the external world. So in terms of inside the Jewish community, I am someone who kind of carries with me a worry about the Jewish future all the time. Like I was raised by a mother who constantly said to me, the chain can't break on my watch. The chain can't break on my watch. And a very, very passionately Jewish parents and grandparents, but particularly my mother, I'm thinking about. And I'm worried about the Jewish future. And I'm, as someone who identifies as Orthodox in particular, I want to make sure that we're not wasting 51% of our resources. I want to be proud of my community. I want the Jewish people and the Jewish community, and I'm not just talking about the Orthodox community now, I'm talking about the wider community, to be an exemplar of inclusion of women and of addressing women's issues in a communal way. I want to stand as a people that has given enormous attention to the dignity of women. I'm not under any illusions that Jewish tradition speaks in one clear voice about women, because it doesn't. There's, again, one of these complicated areas. But I also am aware that the role of women has changed dramatically throughout history. And when we read medieval rabbis, we also have to, and look, I'm a historian, I believe very firmly that we need to contextualize people in their time and place. And that, again, if we come back to this umbrella of tzedek u'mishpat and of tikkun olam and these kind of enduring, overarching, powerful values of Judaism, while women might not have been viewed as part of an agenda of tzedek u'mishpat in the year 1000, they certainly are today. And so I think that I have sort of brought the agenda of feminism into an overarching umbrella of tzedek u'mishpat, even though I am well aware that Judaism has very complicated things to say about women's role.
I'd like to close off our discussion here with your reflections on the following question. You're a historian, you're trained to look at the past, but I think if I understand the role of a historian at all, I think that at least a piece of it is helping others think about the future, maybe as reflected in the past or something like that. And I'm wondering to what degree you're optimistic, or maybe not, about the future of I'll focus you on the American Jewish community with regard to issues of tzedek u'mishpat, whether with regard to feminism or inclusion of other marginalized groups, or however you want to address that sort of general set of questions.
Sure. So something that I've heard my mentor and friend Steve Boehm say many times, he preceded me in my position at AJC, and I agree with him 100%, is that historians are notoriously bad at predicting the future. We are told in our history studies and in our doctoral work that we are not meant to tell people what they should do in the future. We are meant to report and analyze and draw conclusions about the past, and then let people intuit themselves what they mean for the present time and for the future. And so we're so like ingrained in that tradition that it is hard for us to be predictive of the future. However, I will say that I, as a historian who sees moments of crisis in the past as being moments of opportunity very, very often, I think that our moment of crisis now, in terms of COVID and in terms of race relations in this country, I think, I do believe, and maybe I'm being Pollyanna-ish, but I do believe will be catalysts for a future of more unity with respect to certain social justice issues. Not so sure about all of them, but I do think that healthcare, for example, is an issue that the Jewish community I could see coalescing around after living through the experience of COVID-19. I know that statistically already we're seeing from polls that the wider Jewish community, including the Orthodox and Haredi Orthodox community, are more in tune with racial disparities in this country and racism in this country. So I see that is something that this COVID-19 moment, which is terrible, and obviously I would never want it to happen, but I do see that historically, like, those moments are often catalysts for interesting change. I also want to say, with respect to women's issues, it's fascinating to watch, but the bottom line is that no community is immune to the fact that women have become a vital and included part of secular society. And there's a long way to go, obviously, even in secular society, but I see the Jewish community, no matter whether they're on board with it or not, the changes are happening. The changes are happening very slowly, but the changes are happening, I would argue, even in the Haredi community.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughts today about so many important issues in the Jewish community.
Thank you.